Hi, everyone. It's Alan Thornton, President and CEO of St. John's Community Services, welcoming you to another episode of Advocates for All. And I'm really excited because today our guest is Sultan Shakir of SMYAL. He's the Executive Director of SMYAL, has been there for 5 years. And as we highlight LGBTQ issues and people through the course of the month, I was thrilled to be able to have Sultan come and join us. So Sultan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It's really a pleasure to meet with you and talk to you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So Sultan, for people that may not be as familiar with SMYAL, can you kind of talk a little bit about what you do as an organization, who you advocate for and work with, and just your presence here in DC?
Sure. So SMYAL is an organization that started a little over 35 years ago, and it started because the district was actually institutionalizing queer youth for being too whatever. The young ladies were being too butch, the young men were being too femme, and the community thought the best way to deal with it is to institutionalize them. So other members of the community came together and said, no, we want to love and support these young people for whoever they are and let them choose who they are. And so that's how SMYAL started. And it started as a group of chairs in a circle in the basement of a church, and has now expanded over the past 35 years to really look at how we can support young people in, one, identifying the barriers that they face, but more importantly, two, coming up with solutions to overcoming those barriers, and then working with them to implement those solutions. And so the way that looks now is, one, we have a housing program where every day we support 26 youth, and they stay with us for up to 2 years, because a lot of that work of really identifying barriers, identifying solutions, and implementing solutions, particularly when you're talking about barriers that are systemic and intersectional, everything from race to gender identity to income level, a lot of those barriers can compound. And so we really want to make sure that we're intentional about identifying what they are and helping youth overcome them. And so that's why the housing program really isn't a shelter. It's a program that helps young people transition from homelessness to independence. And so we also do work that really works in schools to say, how can we make schools more inclusive? DC is a place that has wonderful laws on the books about inclusivity, but the practice isn't always in line with what the intent of the law is. And so we have staff that will work with gender and sexuality alliances in schools. And those are groups that some people used to call gay straight alliances. We'll have staff that'll work with teachers to train teachers and administrators on how to be supportive of LGBTQ youth, or even parents. How can you support your child if they are transitioning in school? How can you support your child if they have a classmate who's transitioning in school? How do you answer those questions about what that means? And so we really try to look holistically at how we support young people.
And how big of an organization? I mean, I've been on your website, I've tried to read and learn as much as I can. Give me a sense of the number of team members, staff members that you have that are involved in this work, because I imagine it's fairly intensive in the sense of the commitment to the youth that you're supporting. That takes a lot of time to come alongside of them, I imagine, and try to help them access resources and overcome some of those barriers you mentioned. So what does your team makeup look like?
Sure. So to talk to the different departments, so the housing department has a number of case managers. There are 3 case managers plus the director, and then a number of house monitors that are really there to support the young people at night and on weekends through some of the challenges that they may face, whether it's a personal challenge or an interpersonal challenge between roommates. If you've ever had a roommate, you know that happens. Yeah. And then we have our programs team, and they really work with our youth center programs, our school-based programs. They're working on a conference called Rise Up, that now that everything is virtual, that conference will actually be national. So they're working on engaging other partners and other youth organizations to really try to say, how can we connect young people across the country to be connected and rise up and really take action? And then we have our communications department, which is one person who does an amazing job of really taking all the great work that we do with youth and translating that to adults. And then our development team, which takes that communications work and that programmatic work and helps us bring in resources and develop relationships with other organizations to help increase the amount of work that we do. And then operations, someone has to make sure the checks get signed and the building gets taken care of and those kind of things. And so operations and accounting are the other side of the organization. So all in total, there are over 20 members who are on staff.
That's amazing given how much you have going on, it sounds like you would need almost twice that number just to keep everything pushing forward, because you have so much going on. The Rise Up conference, can you tell us a little bit more about that? And is that open to the public? Is that open to other organizations? How do people learn and get involved with that if they want to?
Sure. So there's definitely information on our website, which is SMYAL, SMYAL.org, about the conference. But so it's a youth-led, youth-driven, youth-focused conference. It's really for young people to come together and learn from other young people, learn from other activists, learn from other players in this movement who are doing really great work, to not only learn how an individual can be a part of a movement, how they can be in solidarity with some other really great movements that are happening right now.
So we talked a little bit before the interview here. What is your take on what is happening now? You're very supportive of Black Lives Matter. We talked a little bit about equality and justice. We talked about people engaging maybe from other walks of life and what that looks like right now. But you had some really great perspective that I'd love for you to share with those that are watching us right now. Are you feeling optimistic about kind of what is happening? Are you concerned in any way? What would you want people from the general public, those that are trying to be allies, to think about and pursue or learn, as we kind of work through this together?
Sure. So I do feel optimistic about what's happening right now. Like, we have not seen this type of mass mobilization in generations. And I'm not just talking about here in the US, but like, there have been some amazing things happening around the world. And there have definitely been some wins, everything from some of the symbolic things like racist statues coming down, or statues that, were really put up to put fear in Black people, having those come down, to changes in police budgets, to changes in how schools interact with the police department. So I'm optimistic from the standpoint of actually seeing some changes happen. And I think the question that we're gonna, really have to grapple with as a society is how we keep this momentum going. Because a lot of the things that we are seeing right now are not new. I think the intensity level around them has increased, the awareness has increased, but the deaths aren't new. And so I think the question is how people can really stay engaged in ensuring that things change, particularly things that are systemic, because they're not changed overnight. And so we need people to stay engaged, need people to stay involved.
So speak to that a little bit more, because how do I stay engaged, or how do I get more involved? If I'm not LGBTQ, or if I'm not Black, I'm a white male, of privilege. How do I help the movement? What can I do to be a force for good in this and help contribute to progress?
So I usually describe it as doing three things. It's listening, it's learning, and then it's acting. Back to the point of like continuing momentum, I think the main thing is that people act, but they act after they listen and they learn. And so about 2 weeks ago, I worked with a number of community partners on setting up a panel specifically around what defund MPD means. Because one of the things that I saw is plenty of people were coming out to marches, plenty of people were coming out to protest. They had their Black Lives Matter sign. They called on businesses to spray paint Black Lives Matter on their storefronts and things like that. And I think all of that is great. However, when Black leaders started to say, here's the solution, and it's hashtag defund MPD, that's when a lot of people were like, whoa, I'm on board with Black Lives Matter, but I'm not necessarily on board with some of the solutions to saving Black lives. And that's where I ask people, okay, we need you to listen, we need you to learn, and we need you to do something. And so that panel included a wonderful woman named Janice, who was recently elected. I'm trying to describe this correctly. She is the Democratic nominee for Ward 4 in the DC Council. She's likely going to become the council person for that district, but she's the Democratic nominee right now, so she has to go through the general. She ran on defund MPD as well as a number of other issues. So she was able to really speak through what this means in practice and policy. There was a wonderful law professor named Preston Mitchum who spoke about how he really sees defund MPD, particularly from the abolitionist movement, and what it means in terms of, while it may not be today that we won't have police, this is a system that has proven that it has little value for Black lives. And there was also a white anti-racism educator who was talking about how white people can really be allies to this movement, and it really means taking a step back and letting Black people lead. And so what it really came down to is people hearing what does defund MPD mean in practice and in policy? It doesn't mean you won't have somebody to call if you're in a pretty unfortunate or terrible situation, but it does mean for most of the time when you're calling somebody because there's someone who's asleep in a drive-through, it maybe doesn't need to be somebody with a gun. Or if there's a young Black man sitting on a porch, he probably doesn't need to be engaged with someone with a gun or with a pair of handcuffs. And so for a lot of the, or a number of the challenges that Black people are facing, we don't always need a person with a gun and handcuffs. And I think that is really at the heart of what Defund MPD is talking about, and why there are so many very, very well thought out, well-researched, proven solutions to engaging around community safety that don't involve the police. And so that's why I thought it was really important for the community to hear that, but it was more important for the community to then do something, which is why the community was asked to contact the council member here in DC who manages the police budget. And we're happy to say that there is likely going to be a shift in the police budget this year, that the council is going to change, and an increase in some of the community-driven community safety programs that are also evidence-based.
That's tremendous. I mean, because you're right. I mean, the majority of situations that are faced, do they require a person with a gun to be on site? And, you know, versus having a social worker or a mental health outreach worker, you know, someone else that could be there that's probably better equipped to be able to engage that situation and not have it get escalated. So I think that it's such an important dialogue and discussion that's happening right now. And I understand it is a big idea, you know, in the sense that it does cause people to like, wait a second, you know, because there's this knee-jerk reaction. They have assumptions of what that means, you know, but those assumptions are probably not correct, and right. They need to engage with the dialogue to better understand like what is really meant by this, and could it be transformative? Like this could be a tremendous thing for all of our communities. You mentioned listening and learning, and I just want to take an opportunity to share. Since George Floyd and since Black Lives Matter and the protests have really, in the last few weeks, really just exploded, as you said, this mass outpouring of both anger and support, you know. I've been trying to listen, I've been trying to learn, and so I've been talking a lot within our organization. But Friday, for Juneteenth, I wanted to do something meaningful for me in terms of my journey of learning. And so I took time to watch 13th. And going back to what you were saying about how the system has never been set up to support people of color in our communities all across the country, I was absolutely blown away by that documentary. And I just would recommend that any person wanting to be an ally, that is a good resource in just learning what the historic ties back to slavery, and then how through Jim Crow and how through the civil rights, but how mass incarceration and through various policy decisions all throughout the decades have led to a disproportionate incarceration number for Black men, particularly, and then the impact of that. It was eye-opening to me, and I'm embarrassed that I don't know more along those lines, but I just want to say to people that might be watching that are trying to figure out, is there a starting point? That's a resource. You know, it's one of many, but I found it to be invaluable. So I just wanted to offer that up to those that might be watching and wondering where do they start or how do they get involved? Your thoughts on other resources that people should go to, whether it's learning more about LGBTQ and how to be a supporter there, or whether it's Black Lives Matter. How do we thoughtfully engage?
So I think there's some other really great groups that I would point to. One of them is BYP 100. They do a lot of really great work. It's Black Youth Project, is what the BYP stands for. There are a lot of local groups and local coalitions who are also doing great work. I'm not sure if people are only looking from the DC area watching this nationally, but I frankly think that the groups are relatively easy to find if you're looking for them. And so I think people who are interested in learning have the ability to look that up wherever they are. So I don't want to necessarily mention the specific ones in every location because there are a lot. around the country. And so I would ask folks to do your research if you're really interested in making an impact on this movement, about who's there, who's doing really good work, ask what they need, and then help.
That's excellent. Well, let me ask you as we wrap up here, Sultan, what do you need as an organization, SMYAL, in order to continue to expand your efforts here in DC with LGBTQ youth? Like, how can we support you as a community?
So I think there are a number of things. One, I would say, if there is an LGBTQ youth that you know about who's in need of support, like, please let us know, and we'd love to do what we can to support that young person. We work in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. But we're also now, as I was talking about, working a little more nationally, given that everything is virtual. And so that'd be the first thing. And you can just go to smile.org and find ways to contact the team, whether it's around housing or whether it's around programming. The other thing is we also need financial resources. And so if you are able and have the ability and capacity to donate, I would ask you to go to smile.org/donate and make a donation.
Very cool. Great. Well, Sultan, I just want to thank you so much for your time today and for your insight, and specifically the work that you're doing. So many lives are being touched because of your efforts and your organization's efforts, and that matters so much. So thank you, and I wish you all the best here in DC and the DMV with the work that you're doing and with SMYAL.
Thanks a lot. Take care.